Okay, so you want to own a data center. And right now, this looks like the best business on earth. American data centers ended 2025 with a vacancy rate of 1.4%. Not 14, 1.4. Northern Virginia, the largest market in the world, sat at 0.5%. Rents have risen roughly 70% since 2020. More than 80% of everything currently under construction is already leased before it is finished. Construction starts hit $58 billion in the first 5 months of 2026 alone. More than 1/5 of all non-residential building starts in the country. There is more capital chasing this asset than any other kind of property in America. Two things to hold on to before we go anywhere. The first is that there is a single component in this building that takes longer to arrive than the entire building takes to construct. Not months, 2.5 years for one piece of equipment, and 5 years ago you could get it in a month. The second is stranger. Every one of these buildings is rented before the concrete is dry. Capital is unlimited. Demand is overwhelming, and yet supply cannot keep up. Something is blocking it, and it is not money, and it is not land. Once you know what it is, the fight's happening right now in county zoning boards, and on your electricity bill suddenly make complete sense. We will get to both, but we start with the construction budget, because the construction budget gives away the whole game in about 30 seconds. Here is the thesis, and everything else is proof. A data center is not a real estate business. It is an electricity business with a building around it, and what you are actually buying is a place in line. Let's look at where the money goes. Build a warehouse, an office tower, an apartment block, and the structure dominates the budget. Foundations, frame, envelope, roof, that is what a building is. Now build a data center. The shell, the actual building, is roughly 10 to 15% of the cost. Electrical systems are 40 to 50%. That is the single largest category. Transformers, switchgear, uninterruptible power supplies, backup generators, distribution, mechanical and cooling adds another 15 to 20%. Together, power and cooling are somewhere between 55 and 70% of the capital. Read that once more. The building is the cheapest significant thing in the project. You are not constructing a structure and putting equipment in it. You are constructing an electrical substation and putting a roof over it. The totals are enormous. Current industry estimates put a standard build at $10 to $13 million per megawatt of critical capacity, and AI-optimized facilities at roughly 3 times that per deliverable megawatt. A modern hyperscale campus runs from a few hundred megawatts to more than a gigawatt. And once you see the cost structure, the way the space is sold makes perfect sense. Because a data center is not leased by the square foot. It is leased by the kilowatt. The unit of this entire industry is dollars per kilowatt per month. At the end of 2025, CBRE put the average North American asking rate at $195.94 per kilowatt per month for requirements in the 250 to 500 kilowatt range. That is up 6.5% year over year, the 4th consecutive annual increase. Do the arithmetic on a single megawatt, 1,000 kilowatts. times roughly $196 times 12 months, about $2.35 million of annual revenue per megawatt at asking rates. Nobody in this business talks about square footage. They talk about megawatts. When you hear that a campus is 800 megawatts, that is the size of the building in the only unit that matters. And notice what that pricing unit does to your understanding of the tenant. Because the tenant is not a business renting a room. It is a company buying an electricity delivery service with computing space attached, and the companies buying it are among the most creditworthy institutions on the planet. Microsoft carries a AAA credit rating from Standard & Poor's, one of only 2 American corporations that do. Alphabet is AA+, Amazon is AA, Meta is AA-. Initial lease terms typically run 15 years, frequently triple net, with fixed annual escalators around 2 to 3%. 15-year contracts, escalating rent, AAA tenants. That is not really a property investment. That is closer to owning a long-dated corporate bond that happens to have a fence around it. Which explains why the money showed up. Stabilized hyperscale properties trade at cap rates around 5.5% to 6.5%, tighter than most industrial, and building one, instead of buying one, is estimated to earn a development spread of a few hundred basis points on top. So we have overwhelming demand, exceptional tenants, rising rents, and 1.4% vacancy. Now, you could stop the video here, and you would already understand why every infrastructure fund on Earth wants into this sector. Everything so far is just an unusually good building with unusually good tenants. But it does not explain the thing that actually defines this business. Because if demand is this strong and capital is this abundant, supply should be exploding. In any normal market, 1.4% vacancy would trigger a construction boom that fixes itself in 18 months. It is not fixing itself, and the reason is the piece of equipment I promised you at the start. Let's go find it. The single most important object in a data center is a large power transformer. It steps grid voltage down to something the facility can use. Without it, you have a very expensive empty building with a fence. According to Wood Mackenzie, as of the second quarter of 2025, the lead time on large power transformers is 128 weeks. Generator step-up units run 144 weeks. Medium voltage switchgear around 44 weeks. Some specialized units reach 4 years. 128 weeks is roughly 2.5 years. 5 years ago, these components shipped in 4 to 6 weeks. That is not a supply chain that got tight. That is a roughly 20-fold expansion in wait time. And it is the reason a data center's schedule is no longer set by the construction crew. The physical build takes 18 to 36 months. The transformer takes 2.5 years, and you cannot pour a foundation faster than the switchgear arrives. But the equipment is only the second hardest problem. The hardest problem is getting permission to connect at all. Every large electrical load has to interconnect with the grid, and there is a queue. Nationally, the wait has grown to roughly 5 years, up from under 2 years in 2008. In PJM, the grid operator covering 13 states and the largest data center market on Earth, it exceeds 8 years. More than 2,600 gigawatts of generation and storage are sitting in American interconnection queues. In Texas, the large load queue reached hundreds of gigawatts, of which data centers are roughly 87%. Now, an important caveat, because this number gets abused constantly. Queue volume is not future supply. Of the projects that requested interconnection between 2000 and 2019, only about 19% had actually reached commercial operation by the end of 2024. Most of what is in the queue will never be built. Anyone quoting queue totals as if they are forecasts is misleading you. But the direction is unambiguous, and it answers the question. The Big Five hyperscalers plan somewhere around $600 billion of capital expenditure for 2026, roughly 3/4 of it AI-related, with later revisions pushing that figure higher still. Vacancy is 1.4%. 81.5% of capacity under construction is already spoken for. The buyers are waiting. The capital is waiting. The land exists. The power is not there. That is the answer to the second thing I promised you. This is not a business where you buy a building. It is a business where you buy a position in a queue, and everything else is logistics. Which is why an operator who already holds secured, energized power capacity is sitting on something close to a monopoly asset, and why every acquisition in this sector is really an acquisition of interconnection rights. If you know somebody who thinks the constraint on AI is chips, this is the part to send them. The chips are a bottleneck. The transformer is a longer one. Now, this is where the story leaves the industry and arrives at your house. And I want to handle this part very carefully, because it is the single most misreported subject in this entire sector. The question is whether data centers are raising residential electricity bills. And the honest answer is that it depends entirely on which period you look at. And both sides have real evidence. Start with the evidence that they are. PJM runs an annual capacity auction, essentially paying power plants to guarantee they will be available. For the 2024-25 delivery year, that auction cleared at $28.92 per megawatt day. For 2025-26, it cleared at $269.92, then $329.17, then $333.44, hitting the regulator-approved price cap. That is roughly a tenfold increase in about 2 years. Monitoring, analytics. PJM's Independent Market Monitor attributed 63% of the 2025-26 increase to data centers. That is about $9.3 billion in a single year. Its president later reported that data centers accounted for over $29 billion across the last 4 base auctions. In December 2025, the auction came up short of the reliability requirement for the first time in PJM's history. Those are not projections. Those are cleared auction results in regulatory filings. Now the other side, which almost nobody reports. Careful academic work on the period before 2025 does not find a residential price effect. An analysis out of Rutgers looking at data center openings from 2014 to 2024 found no robust evidence of meaningful bill increases. A separate instrumental variable study found that a doubling of a state's data center capacity was associated with a small decrease in residential rates over roughly the same period. How can both be true? Because the grid had slack, and then it ran out. For a decade, adding a large customer spread fixed grid costs across more kilowatt hours and pushed rates slightly down. Once the system reached its limits, every additional megawatt started requiring new generation and new transmission, and the cost of that shows up in capacity prices. So the accurate statement is not that data centers have been raising your bill for years. It is that they did not appear to, until the moment the grid ran out of room, and now in some regions they clearly are. What happens next depends almost entirely on whether regulators require large loads to pay for the infrastructure they trigger. And that fight is happening in state commissions right now. Which brings us to the political problem. And it has a very specific number behind it. Data centers employ almost nobody. The most automated hyperscale campuses run on roughly 20 to 40 permanent staff per 100 megawatts. Colocation facilities employ more because they serve many tenants, but the ratio is still low. One announced $35 billion investment in Virginia is tied to around 1,000 permanent jobs over 17 years. The jobs that exist pay well. There just are not many of them relative to the capital. Now put that next to the incentives. 37 or more states offer data center tax breaks. Virginia's sales tax exemption produced a reported benefit of about $1.9 billion in a single fiscal year, against an original projection measured in the low millions annually. Ohio paused a program costing over $1.5 billion in foregone sales tax. Texas expects to forego billions in a single budget cycle. Legislators introduced more than 230 data center bills across all 50 states in 2025. More than 500 local jurisdictions have restricted or paused development. New York imposed the first statewide moratorium on large facilities. The argument being made by officials is not that data centers are bad. It is that with this much capital already flowing, they may not need to be paid to show up. And there is one more risk, and it is the one that would actually hurt an owner: rack density. In 2017, the average server rack drew around 5.5 kilowatts. AI racks today run 30 to 100 kilowatts, some higher. Air cooling hits a practical wall, somewhere around 15 kilowatts per rack. Which means a data center built 10 years ago for 5 to 10 kilowatt racks physically cannot host modern AI hardware without a major retrofit, and retrofit runs several $1 million per megawatt of added capacity and frequently does not pencil. So the 1.4% vacancy figure hides a split. There is a desperate shortage of AI-ready capacity and a growing pool of older facilities that are technically occupied and strategically stranded. And I should be straight with you about the biggest open question, because you have certainly heard about it. There is a serious argument that AI capital spending is unsustainable. The most prominent version holds that hyperscalers depreciating chips over 5 to 6 years are understating their expenses, with one widely reported estimate putting the understatement at roughly $176 billion across 2026 to 2028. Critics also point to circular financing, where chip makers invest in the AI companies that buy their chips. The counter-argument is that older chips genuinely do cascade down to less demanding workloads and keep earning, that useful lives are therefore realistic, and that these companies hold among the strongest balance sheets in corporate history. A major ratings agency has warned that AI spending is eroding hyperscaler free cash flow while simultaneously affirming their financial strength. I am not going to tell you which side is right, because the answer depends on an empirical fact that does not exist yet: how long those chips actually stay economically useful. Anyone giving you certainty on that is guessing. So let's put a year on it, both ways. In the good scenario, you own energized capacity in a constrained market. Your leases run 15 years to investment-grade tenants with escalators. Your power is secured, and your interconnection is done. Your facility supports high-density racks and liquid cooling. In that position, you own something close to an irreplaceable asset because a competitor cannot copy it without waiting 2.5 years for a transformer and 8 years in a queue. In the realistic scenario, you are trying to get in. You have the capital. You have the site. You have a tenant who would sign tomorrow. And you are told the interconnection study will take years, the transformer will take 2.5, and the county has just introduced an ordinance. Meanwhile, capacity prices in your region tripled. A moratorium passed 2 counties over, and the incentive package you underwrote is being reconsidered by the legislature. Nothing burned down. Your site is fine. Your tenant is still interested. You just discovered that you were never really buying land or a building. You were buying access to electricity, and that access is rationed by a queue you cannot pay to skip. That is the whole thing in one line. In almost every kind of property, the scarce thing is the location. Here, the location is negotiable, the capital is unlimited, the tenant is already waiting, and the scarce thing is a connection to the grid. Which means the honest question was never whether AI needs more data centers. Every number in this video says it does. The question is, who gets to build them, and who ends up paying for the wires? This video is general education about how an industry works, not business, financial, real estate, or investment advice. If you want to check any of it, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory publishes detailed data center energy reports. PJM and its independent market monitor publish full capacity auction results. And the major data center owners file occupancy, leasing, and financial data with the SEC. All of it is free to read.